Okay, let's get started. Welcome back to the Strategic Management of Information Technology. It's not a bad time in the course to start talking about assignments. And our first assignment is something you probably could be working on at this point. We don't have too many of them, but everything is due at the end of the course. And so we're still building the ITU EMS. It's not quite ready yet, so you can't submit anything yet. So at this point, what you want to do is create them, save them up, and then when everything's ready, we'll have you go ahead and upload everything, and I'll show you how to do that if you're new. But let's take a look at this first assignment, and it's actually kind of easy, and it's very easy. What you want to do is choose an article related to the topic of information or technology used for a business. Make sure it's a business application or business use of the technology, and it has something to do with strategic management. Because there's a lot of gadgets out there. You know, there's like, play the TV on your computer, or, I don't know, like games and things like that. You don't want to find one of those systems. Instead, you want to find an article either online or in a magazine. So it could be printed or it could be online, a blog, a book chapter, a video. Something from a creditable source of a reasonable length, excuse me, and provide a full reference citation. I'm not going to look for the APA format. If you just cut and paste the URL, and that's going to be the most important thing for me to find so I can actually look at the article. And then what you want to do is write a brief abstract of the article, about 250 words, which isn't that much. So you can write more if you want. Just don't go under 250, including a description of the topic, main points, evidence, conclusions, and end with your own reaction to the article in terms of its credibility, usefulness, and applicability, and any implications that it might actually provide. So the focus essentially is to explore the media and find something having to do with business and information technology and some strategic advantage. So it's actually more of a paperwork kind of thing, but it's to get you out there and to start looking around. And what you're going to end up finding is that there's a lot of articles. There's a lot of information. In fact, I would almost say a good 70 to 80% of all of the media right now is on how to use information technology or information systems in a business to promote something related to the effectiveness of the business. So. All right, so today's agenda is Lecture 3, moving right along. And this one here is actually not bad. It's kind of a review of information systems if you've never had an information systems course, and information technology. And what we're going to do, though, is focus on some key factors and strategic advantages. And look at, actually, let me just flip ahead here to the learning outcomes. The main purpose of this lecture is the second point, actually, describing the use of Porter's 5-focus model. You may have heard of it already if you're business students, and the model itself can be applied towards the strategic management of information technology, which is how I'm going to present it. But I'll go over the basics of the model as well, just in case you're not familiar with it. Describing MIS, giving you the kind of the components, and the components so far that we've looked at are the people, the information, and the technology, if you think about it. And then we'll compare and contrast some generic strategies that Porter's come up with to essentially look at how to run and grow and transform a business, a framework for developing business strategies. And then we'll describe the role of the value chain analysis. We probably won't get that far. This is really a two-part, it's about 60 or 70 slides or so. It's like a two-part lecture. So I'm going to hopefully get as far as Porter's 5-focus model, forces model, excuse me. So the main consideration to consider is the concept of information and what it's worth. And as the slide here says, is your Social Security number worth $98? Actually, nowadays it probably is worth less, I think, because Social Security numbers are out everywhere. Depends on how available the information is as to what price somebody would actually pay for it. So in terms of the information technology, and what we're trying to focus on is the strategic value of it in this particular class. However, there's also the flip side of it. There's a problem. Obviously, the more we make information available, the more we use it, the more we use technology to share information and we create technology resources, then we end up with situations where Social Security numbers are for sale. In fact, you can probably buy lists of credit card numbers, Social Security numbers, people's addresses, In fact, in the old days, it used to be legal. You could buy mailing addresses, mailing lists. That I don't believe that information is available in the mainstream commerce. It probably still is available for sale somewhere on the internet. But you can pretty much buy almost anything. So IT can be used to increase profits, reduce costs, increase service quality, and benefit society. It can also be used to hinder society. It can also be used for identity theft and things like that nature. Steal your personal information, commit fraud. And many sites on the web are right now selling your personal information, whether you're aware of it or not. So here's some prices. So I don't know if these are really valid. Is it $98 for a Social Security number? So I don't know. Is it $490 maybe for a credit card number and PIN? That actually would be pretty reasonable, I think. If I could buy somebody's credit card number and PIN, depending on how much of a balance there was on there. So, perhaps there would be different gauges or different levels of cards. Ones with higher balances, maybe they would be worth more. I don't know. Driver's license numbers. And what are you going to do with it? Well, a driver's license and a birth certificate in combination. What is this leading to? In long story short, it's leading to identity theft. So one of the questions you might want to think about is, how many people do you know of who have had their information bought and sold on the internet? And it leads to problems. In fact, almost every consumer these days has had some sort of problem, either a credit card number. If you haven't, you've been really lucky. Or you're not using technology, or you're not using the internet, which is another choice. It's kind of like, don't put it out there and you're never going to have a problem with it. But if you do put it out there, almost every person today who's ever done that has had a problem so far. This is why people try to buy credit reports, and actually, believe it or not, there's scams with that too. So not a bad idea to get. In fact, you can get a free copy usually from your bank or something, or sometimes the credit card providers give it to you as a service. Because what they want to do is make sure you have good credit, and if somebody else is out there using your credit, it may not necessarily benefit you if they're not using it correctly. So, is there an annual, sometimes you can get one of them free annually, sometimes not. So it really poses the question, is technology really good or bad? It's a combination of both, actually. And we are living in the digital age, so we can't avoid that. So it's basically we have to live with technology whether we like it or not in a lot of different ways. And the average American relies on more than 250 computers per day. That would be not necessarily you on a computer, but everything you do. Like if you went to go to Starbucks to buy a coffee, there's a computer usage because that cash register is connected to a network. When you drive your car, there's probably a computer in that car. And when you go get gas, there's a computer pump. Everything's computerized these days. So if you think about the concept, we are using technology whether we want to use technology or not. Whether we're actually aware of it. You could read through some of the other statistics here. Dell Computers, one of the firm companies that have basically started in 1984, now has 65,000 employees worldwide. So the number of employees has increased in terms of the number of people that are working in this particular area as well. I don't really have a stat on how many people in the U.S. population work for technology or work with technology, but I would almost have to say it's probably close to 100%. How many people don't have technology associated with their job? Even if you're working at a gas station, you're using technology. You're using your credit card swiper or something, or some machine that's controlling the pumps. So, or if you're working in a convenience store, everybody's using technology. So, all right. So this is kind of the overview of the information systems and technology part of the lecture in terms of the introduction. Because this class is focusing on strategic management, we're looking at both IS and IT in terms of advantages and disadvantages. And what we're going to talk about today is primarily increasing market share and profits through the use of the Porter's model and eliminating time and location barriers and some of the other things associated with it. So here's the business must drive technology. It's not the other way around. This is the common misperception I usually talk about in my IS class, that if you buy technology and want it to promote your business, you're doing things backwards. You're doing it in reverse. It's really the business that's supposed to be complemented by the technology, and it's the business idea or logic that is enhanced by the technology. So a lot of people, they go out and buy technology. It's like a lot of startup companies, they go out and buy network systems, and they buy computers, and they buy everything. Maybe even invest in applications, and then they figure out, well, what are we going to use this for? It has nothing. It isn't doing anything for us. Well, how come it's not doing anything for us? Well, that's because you're doing it in reverse order. So in terms of the little kind of flow of the information, we have the key technologies to support the business processes, those little boxes that go into the important business processes. So focusing on the business processes, turning them into key business strategy, and then out in the end we have the industry pressures, competition, and stuff that comes in from the outside. So you can kind of look at this kind of like a funnel. You have stuff that kind of comes through this way. You have a projection of technology and core use going out of it, which is kind of like what the slide is supposed to be showing you. But to reiterate my point, it can't be done in the reverse order, so never do this in reverse, as it says on the slide. So you assess the state and the competition and industry pressures that are affecting the organization. So you're starting on this outside parameter, this industrial pressures and competition area, and you're moving inside. You can also approach it from the other direction. However, you have to keep core competencies and business practices in mind, not the technology. So you determine the business strategies to address the competitive and industrial pressures. What business strategies am I going to do to make our product more sellable, make our product better value on the market, or something of that nature. And then you identify business processes to support these particular strategies. Like, what are we going to do to make, well, we have to improve our R&D, or we have to improve our manufacturing, or we have to cut our costs for manufacturing or something. And then you align the technology tools to those processes. Sometimes they're actually, I like to call them core business knowledge or core business practice, which means that's your core advantage or your competitive strategy. And you can probably look at almost any business and go, well, what is their core competency, or what is their core advantage? Oh, they know how to design something well, or their packaging is really nice, or they're cheap. So if you look at even businesses in general, Walmart, cheap, Macy's, nice stuff, so you can kind of see what their core focus is normally placed on. And then, so how does management information systems kind of work into the system? Focusing on those business practices, planning for development, management. So use of IT tools to help the people perform the task. So people and all of the tasks related to the information processing and the management. And then you take the IT and you apply it to the MIS, which is kind of like why it's two separate concepts. We have management information systems and we have information technology. Both of them can't work alone. I mean, you have to have both of them working together, and they actually have to be complementing each other. So here's another problem. People go out and they buy MIS systems, and then they have the wrong IT for it. They have a really nice network system, but nobody can access it because everybody's on the road. So they don't have mobile, they don't have remote logins to anything. So they both actually have to work together. There's three key resources in MIS, and then this is what I basically said in the beginning. Information, people, and information technology. Those are components of MIS. And people, believe it or not, are part of the picture. You can't take the people out of it. It's like in the old days, it was kind of funny. People used to say, oh, the computers, they're replacing us. A computer, and even a really nice MIS system, can't replace a human, because a human is part of the equation. And we need a human to actually work with the system. So, we just don't need the human to do the job the system is doing, like data entry, typing, stuff like that. So that was a common problem, actually, where people were kind of misinformed as to what role computers and technology were playing. In fact, even today, you go out on the street and you ask, not you guys, because you guys are college students, but you ask people who don't have an education, or people who are kind of living in their own little world, and they go, oh yeah, computers are taking over. Soon nobody will have any more jobs. They think that technology is bad, and they resent it. And those are the people that don't use it. It's like the people say, oh yeah, cell phones are ruining everybody's life, or computers are ruining everybody's life. And the reality of the whole situation is that they're enhancing life, and life is changing, and we're adapting to the use of technology. You know, in the old days, if you were expecting a phone call, were you going to sit at home and wait for your phone to ring? You know, cell phones were fantastic. It made people mobile, which made people more productive. So let's say you're working in a business and you're a salesperson, you know, and you're not in your office, you're out at some customer site trying to make another sale. Another customer who is, you know, supposed to call you or does call you, and all of a sudden you can simultaneously talk to this customer, that customer, all these customers. I mean, I don't have to tell you how good a cell phone is. But there's people out there that still resent them, that think they're ruining the world. So, I mean, you can argue a lot of different components with that. In fact, a lot of people think computers are bad for education. In fact, right now in the U.S., this is a huge issue. Computer technology use in education. You know, you guys probably think, yeah, it's great. You know, if I miss a lecture, I can go online, I can look at it. Or, you know, especially if you're taking a Java class or something, you know, hey, look, I can see how something compiles and how something works from a technology perspective. But here's what the problem is. It's the same thing that happens in businesses all the time, and the reason why I'm mentioning this example. They're using it the wrong way. So instead of teaching children the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, they're teaching them how to type on a keyboard. It's like, no, you don't teach a kid how to use a computer. You teach a kid how to read, write, spell, do math, stuff like that, the basic fundamentals. And then you use the computer to complement it, to give them more capabilities, to show them how to, you know, improve accuracy, and you use it as a learning tool. So that's the same thing happens in business. It's like, you know, you don't have somebody buy an accounting program who doesn't have an accounting background and say, you're now the accountant, here's your program. And they don't know what to do with it. It's garbage in, garbage out at that point. All right, so data. This is kind of a review of the information resource in terms of what it is. So we know we have people involved in this. So I asked you on a midterm or final, I said, you know, what are the 3 components of an information? Information. Information's one of them. People is one of them. Hardly anyone will say people, actually. or information technology. 3 resources of MIS. So people is one of them. And I say that over and over again, and then I know people are going to miss it. People? No, that's not anything. It seems like a, you know, like a bad answer or something. I don't know. It seems like, oh no, people. That can't be right. And then the fact that data and facts are different. Raw facts is different from information. That confuses people even after they've taken MIS classes, which is interesting. But raw facts describe particular phenomena. They turn into the data, and then the information is the data that have a particular meaning with a specific context. Raw facts don't have any meaning at all. This is the other problem business people do. They collect a bunch of data. And I think I mentioned this in the last lecture. And they don't do anything with it. They don't actually turn it into any information. It's like, it's great to collect a bunch of statistics, but unless you're going to use it for something, it doesn't make any sense. And here's a combination of a couple of things. And this is a screenshot from Excel if you can't see it. And what we're looking at is an information resource. And what differentiates this from data is the fact that we have accumulation of, let's say, ages. Here we have average age, younger age, older ages, age groups, and then you place your age as a piece of data in the particular resource, and it'll come out with, are you higher than average, lower than average, or are you average? That's the information that's acquired from it. So the information is often an aggregate. And so as a resource, we have tools like Excel that everybody uses. In terms of technology, would be the Excel or would be the program that would work with that. So as the slide says, information is often aggregated data that has meanings such as average age, youngest age, oldest age, story. So if we want to say, well, what's the average age of our customers? That might be nice to know, the average age of your customers, because if you want to know where you're going to advertise to them, you know, are you going to put it in a magazine? Are you going to put it on the internet? You know, are you going to advertise in schools? Maybe your customers are students. So that's kind of the example of how a resource becomes a valuable strategic advantage. So data that becomes information, as an example, a date. The date an employee was born is a piece of information. How soon the employee is going to retire, you know, impact that she has when she retires, convincing her not to retire, or should we offer them retirement? Even such thing as managing human resources can be done using technology. because what we're doing is accumulating information that's going to help us make better decisions. And in the old days, managers never wanted to use this. You know, like a general manager would actually be able to use an information system or information resource to determine, you know, how often should they do merit pay increases? How often should they turn over, or are they having a lot of employee turnover or staff turnover? How much training is needed? All those decisions can actually be made by an information resource. You know, they don't have to do any thinking. They can just print out a report that says, well, the average education level is this. Nobody's taken SAP courses. Nobody's taken this. But we're going to bring in a new SAP system. Maybe we should have some people prepared. Oh, let's go send them to training, you know. And so it kind of makes them a little bit more knowledgeable in terms of what's going on. And in terms of the resource itself, this is what gives us that business intelligence that's so important. And the business intelligence is a collection of the customers, competitors, partners, competitive environments, all sorts of different things. So business intelligence is information on steroids, as the slide says, because it's basically taking and creating some concrete information that never existed before. And that resource all of a sudden becomes, how many should we produce? How many items should we put on the assembly line? You know, really critical decisions that is intelligence for the business. Because if you produce too many, let's say you're a car manufacturer, and you're trying to figure out, you know, by using your information resource, you know, you have to schedule this stuff in advance. You can't just pick one day, because it takes more than a day to build a car. And so you have to decide ahead of time, how many of these items do we need of this particular model? Let's say you're a manufacturing house and you build a lot of different models. You know, which one should you give higher priority to in terms of how many more repeats are you going to get off of that line? What colors are selling better? A bunch of information, actually, that kind of plays a part in terms of business intelligence. Because if you make the wrong product, you can't, well, you put it on sale, I guess. It's like retail stores when they buy too much product. Then they have sales, but that's a loss of money. It's a loss of revenue if you think about it. So you want to have just enough merchandise, but not too much. So you make important strategic decisions using that business intelligence. And here's a resource example where we have a customer ID, an age, a gender, a plan, a salesperson, total sales. So we have a bunch of information. So we combine multiple sets of information in this particular example to come out with a resource. And people say, well, this information resource, you know, going back to the people that don't like technology that say computers are ruining the world. You know, information resources have existed since the beginning of time. Everyone remembers the Rolodex, you know, maybe you don't. You know, or 3x5 cards, or notebooks, pen and paper. That's an information resource. Anytime you write something down, that's an information resource, if you think about it. And what makes information resources on the computer more effective is the knowledge that can be gained from it. So when we take and write something down on a piece of paper, we might have 5 different pieces of paper. We don't have anything that's automatically going to put it all together, archive it, save it, communicate it with other people. When we do that, then we end up with knowledge. And if we use computer technology or technology in general, we create knowledge. And so that the knowledge is the term that describes, as an example, the contextual explanation of the business intelligence, the actions to take to affect business intelligence, the intellectual assets that might occur, the patents, the trademarks, anything that might come out of it becomes the knowledge. Organizational know-how, things that are best practices, frequently asked questions, that's the knowledge that comes out of a technical support department, hopefully. You know, after you've been asked the same question 100 times, maybe just post the answer somewhere so people can find it themselves. Save yourself some work. So most people try to do that in their daily work life anyway, especially, you know, when, let's say, for example, they've had a task that they've had to do. You know, how many people will make a note? Oh, yeah, do this, and this. You know, just next time you have to do this, you have to remember, oh, yeah, you know, that's knowledge, documented. And knowledge is not always documented. However, sometimes the knowledge is something that's acquired and housed as an asset. That sort of like corporate knowledge or company knowledge. And they used to say that came from people who worked at a company a lot, you know, for many years. And then, you know, say, well, you know, then you have to turn around and say, well, what happens today? Nobody spends, like in as an example, in a country like Japan, you work at a company for like your entire life. You start as a kid and you go through management level. That doesn't happen in the U.S. I don't think it happens anywhere else either. It may not even happen in Japan anymore. I don't know. But so how do you do? They'll use information technology now to capture that knowledge that people are doing, because they're going to leave that company and they're going to go to another one. And they're going to go to another one. So we don't have any saved information from how they did their job years ago or anything. So we can use technology to kind of make that into a resource as well. In terms of quality attributes that are associated with this particular resource concept, and once you're familiar with information resource as a concept, and once you start using it, then you know how to tell a good one from a bad one. And these are some of the qualities that kind of differentiate the two. Timeliness, is it actually accessible? Is the database something that is available, that you can query, and is it connected with applications? And is it being used? Is it timeless? Is it available when it's needed, describing the right time period for actually making it available, accessible? Location, no matter where you are, can you access it? The form, is it can it be, actually the form is interesting because this is Google's an information resource company in a nutshell. Consumer-oriented information resource. Your Google Gmail, your voicemail, everything's all integrated into that same concept in terms of what they're doing with it. And they're creating a huge resource. And what makes them interesting is that they have audio, text, animation, they have everything combined in different forms. So the form of that resource is kind of unique. If you've ever tried Google Voice out, you get your voicemail messages in the form of text that come through your Gmail account, which is great. You know, it's close. It's like 70 to 80% accurate, depending upon how much line noise there was and how easily it translated those text, the words, the voice words into text. But for the most part, it's using a lot of different forms to create that media. Validity, that's a huge problem. You know, you're relying upon this data to tell you what products to produce and what colors to make them in, or what's popular and what's not popular. Well, okay, so did they cheat on the surveys? Did you get consumers who filled out surveys to answer questions so that they could get a free Best Buy card or something? You know, and so they just answered yes to everything so they could complete it as quickly as possible. And you have an entire database filled with this information, but it makes absolutely no sense. Or, you know, in fact, what you can do is cross-check and if you look at like some data mining technologies and stuff, you can cross-check and do checks on the data to see how valid this really is. You know, is this a bunch of junk? And you know, and last point, the garbage in, the garbage out. You don't want to use junk to make huge corporate decisions. Yeah, we should add another campus. Yeah, we should add, you know, this program, that program. It's like based on junk because people wanted to get a Best Buy card or something. You know, there's something. Clicked all the boxes as fast as they could so they can get through the survey. So lack of the above creates that GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. Here's the pictorial kind of version or view of the organizational perspective of it. And what we've got now is on the left-hand side, we've got the current state of the organization, ups and downs in terms of the goals and the directives. And then we have the granularity, fine level of detail versus larger level of detail. Because this is actually where we get like drill down and we get all sorts of different types of abstractions on the data in terms of its presentation as a resource. You know, in fact, depending upon what kind of data you're interested in, you have to actually get it in the right granularity. Otherwise, it makes no sense. If you're a corporate executive, you're getting a lower level of detail, higher level of abstraction on that data. You want to know how many sales were made by this particular Target store on this particular month and compare it with all the other Target stores. If you're a lower level down in the totem pole, you want to know how's my store doing, or it's how is my department doing, or how are my individual salespeople doing. So that's what's in terms of the finer and lower level. And the pyramid here is kind of giving us our combination of the customer, suppliers, and others, our ins and outs that are working. And our horizontal level on the bottom is giving us between the functional business units and the work teams and the different perspectives on that. So it's kind of an interesting little pyramid. it can be broken out, probably understood clearer by looking at the different components of it rather than the big picture. This came out of the same textbook that I was using for the last lecture. The guy really loves pyramids. I'm not quite sure why. I'm not a huge pyramid fan, but in fact, I'm noticing that as a huge trend in IS. IS and IT textbooks, they're all pyramid-oriented. Everything's presented in a pyramid. Whether we need a pyramid for that? I guess we do. Shows you at the higher level, it's smaller, bigger on the bottom. So on the bottom we have more business functional units and things of that nature. As we go up, we have grainer, we get higher level of abstraction, and we get, we're showing different strategies and different goals from different perspectives in terms of who's looking at it. And you can take this and go strategic management, middle management, lower level management, and then line workers on the bottom in terms of the hierarchy of the structure, which is why that is a pyramid makes sense. So also looking at in terms of the flow of the information, which I didn't go over. So the upward describes the state of the organization based on the transactions. So looking at from here in terms of the number of transactions that are reported in the data, you're going to get an accumulation up here. You're only going to get each individual single abstraction on the bottom, each individual transaction on the bottom. The downward strategy goals, directives, looking at it from pass through the levels. So you can look at the business functional units as well in terms of work teams and stuff. So I think I pretty much hit most of those points. In terms of the resource itself, all resources themselves, what it describes, we have internal, external, objective, and subjective type of information in different categories that we could look at. In terms of an internal information, because if you think about the resource, not all resources are created equally. Some of them are for different purposes in terms of what you're going to use it for. And then, again, hopefully you're going to be using the right resource for the right task, for the right job, not looking at external data, trying to figure out internal problems with it, or so you're looking at the right audience, hopefully. So in terms of the internal perspective, specific operational aspects, the outside is going to be the environment, the surrounding area. How are others doing right now? Because if your sales are down, it may not be necessarily your problem. It might be that we have a bad economy. Or it might be that people are unemployed or something, so they don't have disposable income, and you're selling a product that only, is not really necessary or something. Objective, quantifiable, describes something that is known. Subjective tends to describe something that's unknown. Subjective, so it could go one way or the other versus something that we know what answer we want, or in fact, we can go in both directions. We can use the resource to say, look at this information and tell me what it says. Tell me what my best product is. Or we can do the opposite, work it from the other direction and say, I like this product. Should I make more of it? Or run it back through the system and see from the resource, from whatever the resource information is giving us, is it something we want to continue making or something? So people, going back to the people concept, their most important resource in the organization focuses on technology literacy. Yeah, you have to get the people actually able to use the resource and making the resource available. Information literacy, knowing that the people that are looking at the information are looking at it in the right light, that are looking at the right information, getting the right conclusion from the information. And then ethical responsibilities, that's the interesting one, and that goes back to the beginning. Do we sell social security numbers? Do we sell addresses and, credit card information? And if you think about it, people are like the single worst, the weakest link of the system, because they're the ones that have ethical issues. Computers don't have ethical issues normally. Computers driven by people have ethical issues because, the people are the ones that go, I like this, or they have feelings, emotions. They think too much. People think too much. So computers don't think; they just follow orders. So yeah, maybe we should replace everybody with a computer. That makes a lot of sense. All right, so people resources. Technology literate knowledge workers. Knows how and when to apply technology. So going back to the comment I made initially when people say, oh, we're losing our jobs to computers. Yes, you're losing the technology illiterate jobs, the ones that you basically type in, data entry, You know, you're not going to, I don't believe there are any data entry jobs anymore. Hopefully not. There's no typing jobs anymore. Hopefully not. There's, I mean, everybody should hopefully use a scanner, perhaps, to get data in. Those would be not considered knowledgeable jobs. They would be considered rudimentary, like doing math calculations. In fact, computers do math for us now too, in the business field. You know, basic stuff, and they make less mistakes or fewer mistakes. They you know, they're accurate. There's no human error associated with that. So in a lot of cases, the computer, the application, does a better job. However, the human who's working with the computer has to be knowledgeable in terms of what the computer's doing. So it's not that we don't have to know how to do data entry anymore. We have to know what data entry is supposed to work like, what it's supposed to do, and we have to have that knowledge to apply it to something so that we can oversee it, look at it. And an example would be a technical recruiter, or a recruiter in general, who would be looking at scanned versions of resumes that might look at something and go, well, I don't recognize that word, and go, oh, it was probably a scanner error. That candidate probably used a font that didn't translate correctly or something, or be able to interpret the results that come out of that and use the resource. So knows how and when to apply the technology. Information literate knowledge worker, in terms of the information component of it, can define information needs. So the information worker is going to need to know, well, what type of information would make my job more effective. Knows how and where to obtain the information, knows where to get it from, understands the information, which is kind of interesting, and acts appropriately based on the information. Doesn't act inappropriately or take the information in the wrong context. And then we have that ethics on the bottom of the slide there, principles and standards that guide our behavior towards other people. So it's kind of interesting how ethics play an issue, and here's how it works. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's ethical. If someone gives you a piece of information, then we have this whole thing. And then the interesting thing about ethics, in fact, you can major in ethics. Actually, you can take classes in it too. For the 1 or 2 slides I'm going to give you in this class, it's not going to be enough to have a complete background on the ethical issues and systems. However, it's common perception that if it's legal, it's ethical. There's a lot of legal things that aren't ethical, actually. Basically, when you start looking at information, just because you have a piece of information, should you use it in certain ways that maybe it wasn't intended to be used for, but you legally obtained it? Well, that's what happens on the internet, actually, because people forget about ethics. Because, you know, some of the internet isn't really real. Is it really an environment for which we can be held accountable? In a lot of different ways, there's absolutely no way of tracking your behavior on the internet. And so there's a lot of scammers, a lot of hoax people that, you know, hey, sign up for this credit card. And they give you the information. They fill out a form. They give you the information. But you're not really a credit card company. You're not really going to sell them a credit card. But you're going to basically sell their information to other people who might use it. I mean, is that ethical to sell somebody's information that you obtained legally? You asked them for it and they gave it to you, which means you didn't steal it from them. So that's basically one of the major kind of problems. In fact, that goes on. Usually the elderly people or children that, you know, will give out almost anything because they think it's legitimate. And I mean, sometimes, you know, experienced people get tripped up, especially when they get something that's being represented by a company that really isn't the company, it's somebody else. In fact, the whole PayPal scams and stuff like that have caught a lot of people. All right, so here's our little ethical versus unethical, legal versus illegal. You always want your actions to fall into quadrant 1, both ethical and legal. So quadrant 3 down there is legal but unethical. Here we have illegal and ethical, which actually happens when something is illegal, but it's ethical. You illegally obtained it, but you used it for a good reason. So that can get you in trouble, actually. And then the quadrant at the bottom, hopefully you're not doing things illegally that are unethical, because that's where the scammers are normally falling into. All right, so information technology as a resource, you have to consider both the hardware and the software. And this is the part I can probably skip through a little bit faster, because hopefully you should be familiar with it. If not, download the slide set, take a look at it in a lot more detail. In terms of the hardware component, we actually have to kind of think of it more along the lines of what kind of hardware. Because we have an interesting thing that's going on in terms of hardware turning into devices, turning into things that are kind of non-traditional computer hardware. As an example, sensors that are being used, scanners that are being used. Let's talk about video surveillance that's being used. Hardware, to actually watch your customers go throughout the store, watch your products, barcode technology that sends off an infrared signal or something like that on an item. We've all seen it kind of in a low-tech fashion where they put, when they're trying to do inventory control, especially bookstores, how easy is it to grab a book and walk out? So they'll put like a little tag in there so the alarm goes off on the door. That's old-fashioned. Now we have newer stuff for inventory control, to keep track of boxes that are in the back. So we can just walk to the back, wave a wand, and see how much we have of everything. We can track people through heat sensors and motion sensors throughout the building, so we know which aisle someone's standing on, so we can go back and take a look to see if that person needs help or something. We can track practically almost anything using hardware in terms of the resource. And that actually becomes part of the information technology. So you have to kind of break out of just computers these days. In fact, what I find is kind of interesting is how cell phone technology is adapting to be used for different purposes. Like a lot of American families, they give kids cell phones, because every kid wants a cell phone. But what they don't realize is it's also a tracking device, so they know, and they can actually there's programs for it too. I'm sure you've heard of them. Where you can see, is my kid at school? Oh, my kid's not at school today. And there's really programs that kind of send up triggers that say your kid has left the school grounds. Yeah, but it's only 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She doesn't get out till 5 or something, or 4. Where you can micromanage what your kid is doing, who they're eating lunch with, what they're doing, what they did after school, before school. And you don't really need to tell them that you're doing this either. It's not unethical in my opinion. But again, another use of technology in terms of hardware that promotes a resource, gives us information. In terms of input, output, storage, CPU, telecommunications device, and connecting devices, we're hopefully all familiar with modern day technology, so I'm going to skip through this too. So let's look at software for a second. 2 types of software: application software and system software. We are familiar hopefully with that as well. Operating systems and then applications. So let's look at Porter's 5 forces model, which is kind of like what I wanted to talk about today, and bring this into information technology now that we have a little background of what it is we're talking about in terms of the technology. So the 5 forces model helps business, for those people who have not heard of it, helps businesses, people understand and the relative attractiveness of the industry's competitive pressures. And it breaks it out into these 5 different components. And the next slide actually has a better picture of it, but we're looking at buyer power, supplier power, threats of substitute products and services, threats of new entrants into the market, and rivalry among existing competitors. This is this is a picture I was talking about. That's kind of a better view of it. We actually have to look at, in terms of information technology, all of these 5 components. Normally in a lot of other different types of business practices, you only look at one. If you're in the marketing department, you're looking at threats, perhaps, threats of new entrants. You want to make your product unique. If your product's at the end of the life cycle, you might be looking at maybe improving it, making it more sustainable, adding something to it to attract it. Maybe bargaining power of buyers, perhaps, and bargaining power of sellers. If you're working with manufacturing, you're probably trying to reduce your costs in terms of coming up with better parts, better quality parts. So the model is used in a lot of different fields. It's heavily used in information technology and information systems. Because if you think about it as a concept, and what this slide is doing is breaking it out and just showing you information technology in terms of its application. So let's talk about buyer power for a moment. And buyer power, high when buyers have many choices, and low when their choices are kind of few. So if you think about videos, in fact, let's just take Netflix as an example. in the old days, well, when Netflix first started, actually, Netflix is a really good example, actually, because it's kind of current. When Netflix first started, we had video stores that sold DVDs, and Netflix sold DVDs, not sold DVDs. You know, I'm sure you guys are familiar with it. You get like a couple of them in the mail, you watch it, you turn it around, you put it back in the mail, and you online. You use the internet. So it's an information resource intense service. But what happens when everything goes electronic? So buyer power, we talked about that. We had a lot of choices. We didn't have too many choices in the beginning. Netflix actually made a lot of money in the beginning when we had video stores because it was easier as an alternative than driving to a video store, to a Blockbuster. I don't think we have any more video stores. I'm not sure if we do. Actually, we do. I still see video stores. Usually it's in lower income areas because they're not technical savvy. They're not doing things electronically yet. They're still doing things the old way. And you can burn your own DVDs and stuff like that as well. So, I mean, people are still using DVD technology. However, if you're living in modern day times, everything's electronic these days. No one waits for a DVD to show up in the mail. But Netflix, believe it or not, is still growing. And they're doing much better than they used to. Back when buyer power was pretty good. When buyer power became pretty strong now. So how did they do it? Well, they used information technology. Now we have Netflix that works on Wii systems, game consoles. So everyone's got a game console. Everyone uses the internet in terms of activity for their games. They have internet access. Now they do streaming video through game consoles. Interesting. If they didn't do that, they would be pretty much broke, out of business at this point. Because nobody rents DVDs anymore. No one's going to wait for it to show up in the mail. So companies, like iTunes, where you can download a DVD or download well, they made it so that their streaming video runs faster. And they made different options for it, so you can actually keep a copy of it. You can watch it. You can return it easily. You can do it over the internet. You can do it through a game console. And they pretty much reinvented themselves using information technology to adapt with the times to make themselves yet more profitable than they used to be in the past. Because now they don't have the expense, the mailing expenses. Now they don't have to actually throw away DVDs and burn new DVDs to make copies of stuff. It's easier. So the business practice is easier, fewer employees, more profitable, actually. And they're still competitive because they're still providing something that they can't get anywhere else. Where else are you going to be able to download a DVD onto your Wii system? But Netflix does it. So, all right, so that's an example. In terms of what they did is they got rid of the buyer power. Buyer doesn't have any choice. Has to use Netflix. So, and who else is going to go enter? Well, that's a different topic, but who's going to enter into that market? Nobody, because Netflix has got it. They're going to leave that alone. It's kind of like trying to compete with Apple and iTunes. So competitive advantages are created to get the buyers to stay within a given company. So they did that so that the customers would stay. United Airlines offered the frequent flyer program, then everybody else offered the frequent flyer program. That didn't quite work. Well, it worked in the beginning. In fact, they had a lot of people that were using that. Airline industry right now is actually taking a huge turn. I'm not quite sure what direction it's going to go in, but buyer power is pretty high. So people can pretty much shop on the internet and get prices that they can't normally get anywhere because companies are pretty much desperate. Apple iTunes, buy and manage your music. In the old days, the way iTunes kept buyer power is if it was in iTunes, you couldn't get it out. It was stuck. And then they opened it up and they said, oh, okay, customers want to burn CDs. Oh, they want to take and export it. Okay, let them do it. Otherwise it was DRM'd and it was stuck in the iTunes. And if the iTunes went down, well, you could call up Apple and they could restore your account. And you can re-download your music if you wanted to. But in terms of Dell, their customization, to customize a computer purchase, which is why a lot of schools actually ended up with big contracts. So they got people in there with their ability to customize. So. Competitive advantages and first mover advantage. So we have, in terms of the buyer power, providing a product or service in a way that customers value more than what the competition is able to do. Well, that's the age-old standard. That's Business 101. It's been going on for years. But now we can use technology to make that more effective. If you're not using technology, you're stuck. because everybody, all the competitors are using technology. First mover advantage. Significant impact on the gaining market share by being the first to market with competitive advantage. Now, in the old days, that was the exact opposite. If you think about the concept, if you were the first product on the market, everybody else who came in after you had reduced costs because they took advantage of you were the one who figured it out, and you went broke because the next guy who comes in is going to build a better mousetrap. It's going to build a better. Doesn't have to spend all that time thinking of the product. You already thought of it. It's going to have reduced cost because, oh wow, people want cell phones now that can do email. So now everybody is, all the suppliers are producing these parts and making it available. So the second or third entry in were the most profitable. The first guy went broke. But think of it now with technology. Let's say you bought an iPhone, you bought it from AT&T, and you signed up for a 2-year contract. Well, up until recently, you were stuck with AT&T, which meant even if that iPhone sucked completely and didn't work right, you were stuck with a 2-year contract from AT&T. Competitive advantage because you can't switch. You're stuck. You have pretty much first moved in and you've taken everybody. But now we have Verizon who sells the iPhone. And you notice now we can buy an iPhone for $49 from AT&T? Yeah, they're going to they're practically going to give those iPhones away for free so that you can go back to them because they're losing all of their customers because the first mover using this concept as the advantage, they took over the market share of a lot of customers who wanted iPhones, who got AT&T contracts. And some of them are still under contract. So in another couple of years, AT&T is going to be crying for more customers. So now their whole ploy is, well, let's reduce the price of that iPhone. You could buy it for $50 from AT&T as long as you sign up for a 5-year contract or 4-year contract because they want to keep their customers. So, all right, so all competitive advantages are fleeting. So all airlines are now basically offering frequent flyer programs. Now I have Verizon, who's you can get an iPhone from Verizon. Actually, it's more expensive, but in fact, their plan is more expensive too. So it's not exclusive. You can still get it from AT&T. So pretty soon, everybody will be selling the iPhone, and Sprint will have. Is Sprint still in business? I don't know. T-Mobile. T-Mobile's still out there. Maybe T-Mobile will have the iPhone next. So. But that was good. That was good business for AT&T to begin with. So that's kind of how different technology is when you add that component. Yeah, they were the first one, but they didn't lose out. They made the most money. Because when the iPhone was brand new, we had people waiting in line at mailing lists for a year to get a new iPhone. Now you can just go down to the store and pick one up for $50. It's no big deal. Supplier power. So here's another kind of difference where technology changes the traditional pattern. In the old days, you had, in terms of the supplier power, it's high when buyers have few choices and low when the choices are many. In terms, you have a lot of choices to buy something from. And the opposite is basically the opposite of the buyer power concept. Well, in the old days, we had suppliers, and maybe only one guy sold what you needed. And if one guy is going to sell what you needed, then essentially what ends up happening is that price is going to be extremely high. So if you're building a product that uses that supply, that piece that you need, you're pretty much, you don't have any choice. Your business prices are being, and your product is being driven by your suppliers. Now it's the other way around. Now it's let's create suppliers and let's buy them. So big companies like Apple, who makes iPhones, they have their own suppliers, and they own their suppliers. Because why are you going to let somebody else determine your price? Instead, you set them up, you establish them, or what they do, or I'm not quite sure if they do this exactly, but some other businesses do this. They scout out suppliers. This is kind of like eBay and PayPal. PayPal was a separate company. They did credit card processing. Same thing they do now. But they were owned by a different company. Well, they were their own company. eBay came around and said, well, we seem to be working with you a lot. Let's buy you. Because we don't want you as a supplier anymore. Because you're determining our pricing structure and you're providing services for our customers. They're our customers. We want our customers back. So they bought PayPal. So now they're all in one, all under one roof, and they're happy now. Well, you're manufacturing a product, you're going to buy the suppliers who are making your PCB boards. You're going to buy the suppliers that are making, if you're making them in large quantity. If you're only making a one-time shot and you're not using them for very much, then you can kind of play around with them in terms of the pricing and the costs and kind of get an exclusive agreement from them for certain things. But you have, as the seller, as the manufacturer, you have more power these days with technology because you can actually find them. In the old days, how did you find them? It was really hard, actually. You had to go through the phone book, go to trade shows, go all over the place. Now you can get it through information resources, big hubs from all over the world. So you can find people that are out of the country, find people that are, small. You don't have to be a big company to be small. So it basically opened up the market. So what we have on the left-hand side is your suppliers, your organization in the middle, and then your customers on the other end. And in terms of what the slide is telling you, you want supplier power to be low here between the suppliers and the organization. You want the buyer power to be high. So you reduce it by using technology to get little guys to open up the supplier market. So supplier power is low, so you buyer power is high, and you take control, or you buy them out and you own them, and you have no supplier. And then the other choice here between your organization and your customers, you want the supplier power to be high here. You want the buyer power to be low here, because you want essentially the fact that you are the only one on the market that are selling this particular product. You want the market share. You don't want all the competition. If you're an airlines company, you don't want everybody else to be having frequent flyer miles. So they have to come up with something new, actually, because that concept's pretty old. Nobody uses it. I don't know. Maybe you guys still do. But they have to have something else, like free flights or something. That would be nice. Actually, an airline company that didn't sell you food, that gave you food again, that might actually be a good turn, too. So now you have to buy your own food if you go on a plane. Well, domestic flights. So. All right, so the threat of substitute products and services in the old days, in the traditional business model, we had copyright infringements. We had, oh yeah, here, look at this. Take it to China. Make me one of these. We had illegal duplication, infringement and stuff. We had substitutes. We still have substitutes going on, but it's a little easier now because now that information is more obtainable, we know what the ingredients are. We even know who the suppliers are. And so now then the whole concept of the OEM product, original equipment manufacturer, where it really is a Dell, but it's being sold under a different label. Well, we have cell phones, GE phones, that are being sold under this label, under that label. Depending upon which carrier was going to provide the service for it, which features are going to be on it. So now we have a little bit more cooperation, so it's not really a substitute, it's more of a product line in some ways. And we can use technology to improve that. So the threat of substitute products and services, high when there are many different alternatives. And the buyer and low when there are very few choices, which is like the iPhone. Nobody makes an iPhone. Although maybe give it another, well, see, we need 17 years on that, so we're getting close, actually. How long has the iPhone been out? Maybe 5 years or something? 4 or 5 years? I suspect 6 years, you think? Yeah. So in another 10 years, we're going to have generic iPhones.
Oh, no, I've seen the generic iPhone recently.
Those are illegal.
I know, but I've seen
Yeah. No, I've seen them as well. In fact, you can go on eBay and you can buy generic iPhones that are made in Taiwan.
Exactly like
They look just like them.
It's just not Apple logo.
Yeah, there's no Apple logo on it. Yeah, it's fake. It's a substitute, but it's illegal, actually.
Much cheaper.
Yeah, you can buy the Android phones, too. In fact, you can buy tablets. You can buy a fake iPad, too. That's a tablet that runs an Android operating system, which is not bad, actually. I don't have one, but I've been kind of curious, actually, about them. Because if you do Android development, or, you do platform stuff, you can think, wow, it's a new operating system. You can make your own apps for it and stuff like that. I mean, it's like a nice little toy.
If you put AT&T SIM card on it, then AT&T, they detect the data users,
Mm.
and they automatically add the data plan to your account and track down.
Oh, really?
They have the secure ways to do it.
Wow. Yeah, they can pretty much tell when you have fake stuff out there, too. So.
Samsung Tab has this feature.
fake ones, Samsung tabs. No, those are legitimate. The Samsung tabs.
Yeah, the original
Yeah.
Samsung tab has this feature.
Has those features.
Yeah, you can insert your SIM card and use the data plan.
Well, they also have devices to crack them. They've had that for the iPhone for years. You put this little thing in there. You put your own SIM card in there from a different carrier. You don't have to use AT&T. So, yeah, but unfortunately, what ends up happening is the companies can circumvent that, can automatic. In fact, Apple does this all the time. Every one of those new software updates you get, is adding something to prevent somebody else from doing something illegally on the phone. So if you keep updating your phone, eventually it won't work again. So you have to go back to a different version of it. So it's not quite as easy to get a substitute product on that. And that's essentially a good example of how technology, information technology, can be used to protect the product, which is different than the old days. In the old days, when we weren't using technology like that, anyone who wanted to here's a chair, send it to Taiwan, have it reproduced, bring it back into the States, and here's another chair, acts just like it. When it's a low-tech product, it works quite well. When it's a high-technology product that sends a signal, receives a signal, has software on there that's controlling the operation, or has an operating system on there that's proprietary, not quite as easy to duplicate or to substitute. So, in terms of substitute products, some of the traditional methods, and actually mentioned in the slide here, switching costs can reduce this threat. It's kind of like if you wanted to switch, it's going to be more expensive than if you just kept it. And believe it or not, actually, this is kind of like what happens when people buy cars, especially when they lease a vehicle. If you lease a vehicle for 2 years, 3 years, you end up paying more money to return the car before you're done with the lease than if you just kept it for the life of the lease and then returned it when you were supposed to. Because the same thing, anything you cancel early, they're locking you in because they don't want you to buy a substitute. They want you to use that car on that lease. They don't make it very advantageous for you to switch. So if you can lock a customer in, keep them in, and no ability to switch. And in the old days, this is kind of like what Microsoft was trying to do. Because they never made Microsoft Office for the Mac. And it hadn't been until within the last, I don't know how long it's been out, but originally it wasn't available. Because if you wanted to use Microsoft Office and you wanted to exchange files with people who used Office files, and everybody used Office, you had to use a Windows machine. And then they said, okay, we'll open it up, make it, because they ended up selling more licenses to Office because now they opened up the market, essentially. So now Mac people are using Microsoft Office. But what ended up happening is you got to substitute, you got OpenOffice.org. It's compatible with you don't have to buy Microsoft Office, actually. In fact, you don't even have to buy it for the Windows machine either. You can use OpenOffice.org. As a substitute, it's illegal, it's open source software, but it doesn't run the same. It runs slower, it doesn't look the same, so it may not support all the same features. So you can control by the switching cost, long-term contract with financial penalties in terms of the leases I talked about. Great service, it's like the BMW. If you get 2 years of free scheduled maintenance service that you've paid for, are you going to turn your car in before 2 years are up? Probably not. You're going to lose your service that you've already paid for. So it's kind of like rental agreements on houses as well. You sign a lease, you have to pay, and the rent goes up incrementally. But if you end the lease, then your rent is going to skyrocket after that, like rent-controlled environments and things of that nature. We don't have too much rent control in California, but we do on the East Coast. People that have been living at places for years, that works to their benefit, actually, because the rent's way below market value. But they're in there, and they are under contract. And as long as they keep paying that rent, they can do it for the rest of their lives. And the rent can never go up. But we don't have that here. Personalized products based on purchase history. This is what shopping cart applications try to do. If they've kept track of what you've been purchasing and they know what you've put into the cart, they can actually recommend other products that may go well with the items that you have in your cart, stuff like that. Or from the websites that you're purchasing from. And then threats of new entrants. This is when technology kind of sort of works, but it kind of fails in a lot of different ways because technology opens up the door, creates communication, shares information, makes everything almost public. I mean, it might be unethical, might be illegal, but it's there, it's out there, it's public. So it's really hard to prevent new entrants into your market, unless you're making something that's technologically impossible for somebody else to produce, which is kind of impossible these days, reproduce. So we have the threats of new entrants in terms of high when it is easy for competitors to enter the market and low when the barriers are significant, or pretty high. And we have the entry barrier. This is just terminology if you're not familiar with it. Products or services, features that customers have come to expect and that are being offered. As an example, if you're running a bank, you need ATMs, you need online banking, you need bill pay. If you're running a business, you need a website. Otherwise, people think you don't exist. So, rivalry among different existing competitors. We don't really see very much of this either. Everyone's pretty much generic these days. If you go to any bank, they all have online banking. They all have bill pay. They all have this. They all charge the same thing. In fact, nowadays, if you pay for your checking account, you're making a mistake. Like most checking accounts are either free or they're $10 at the most. In the old days, they had different qualities of service where you could pay $20 a month, but you get free something else. Like you get free cashier's checks or money orders. But people don't use the banks anymore for those services. In fact, some people don't even buy checks anymore because you can use technology to print your own checks. So little changes in that. In fact, with all these features, a lot of the features went away because people can just do it themselves. You can print your own statement out from the internet. Why should we spend money to send one to you in the mail? So now, you'd be lucky if your bank actually sends you a statement anymore. Or, they don't charge you extra to send a statement. In fact, there's some banks that charge you to deposit cash because it takes more processing than checks, electronic transactions. It's like old technology is more expensive now than when you use new technology, which is kind of weird if you think about it. But, why should you have to pay the bank to deposit cash? It's usually like 1% of the cash amount that you're depositing. So it's ridiculous. All right, so in terms of rivalry among existing competitors, it's high when the competition is fierce and low when the competition is more complacent, not as many of them. General trend is towards more competition in almost all industries. And there's a dozen banks. There's a dozen online this, online that. So IT certainty has certainly intensified competition in all different sectors of business. Has made it basically so that people have to be able to be competitive technology-wise. Okay, so we have, and I'm going to go on for a few more minutes here and talk about the 3 generic strategies and then end with that concept. So this will be a 2-part lecture. I'm not going to cover all of it today. So instead of focusing on the high market on all 5 different forces, we've got the 3 generic strategies that he has come up with. And so he's identified these strategies for beating the competition. So these are ways that you can use information technology in terms of these strategies. And the three ones to focus on are the overall cost of the leadership. Sometimes it's not always best to be the leader in the industry. Sometimes you make more money not being the leader. And then the differentiation cost and the concept of being different and how different do you want to be. Because sometimes if you're selling a generic technology product, who cares? If it's generic, if it's not any different than your competitor. Because sometimes you don't want to be different, you want to be the same. So people will choose you as an alternative choice. And then the focus in terms of the characteristic of the business. So we have the focus strategy on top. So we're narrowing the market scope. And you see the focus is kind of big, actually, as that big green box on the top. Which means we're looking at a global market these days. I mean, we don't want to focus. We don't want to narrow anything down. And in terms of the broad scope on the bottom, we have narrow scope on the top, broad on the bottom. And on the broad aspect, we have unique competencies and we have low-cost competencies in terms of the different components that make up the broad sector. And within those, we can look at the differentiation and we can look at the overall cost leadership. terms of a strategy. So let me talk about each one of these kind of in a little bit more detail, and I'll conclude it after I get done talking about these three generic strategies. So the overall cost of the leadership, offering the same and better quality product or service at a price that is less than what any of the competition is able to do. This is kind of like what Apple's trying to do, what AT&T is trying to do with a $50 iPhone. Why go to Verizon and spend $199 or $299 when you can buy one for $50 from AT&T, $49.95?
That's not 4G.
It's not 4G. You're right. You're right, because they don't have a 4G network.
No, it's for iPhone 4.
Oh,
It's not iPhone.
no, it's not. It's the earlier ones. You're right. It's the older ones that they're trying to get rid of. But think about it. If you've never owned an iPhone and you want to own an iPhone, that is actually, that's the cost leader right there in terms of a generic. In fact, I liked my 3G. I liked my older model. I had the older model before I switched to the Android. And I'm actually kind of tempted, believe it or not. That's why I keep talking about it. I'm thinking about maybe this weekend getting one of those $49.95 iPhones before they're all gone. But that's a classic example, though, and how they've trapped me in as a consumer. I might actually go get one. Who knows? Maybe next week I'll have my new iPhone. I just don't want the AT&T network. I'm a Verizon customer already, which that's my problem. I don't want to switch back. I switched a long time ago and don't want to switch back. So, all right. So, here's some other examples. We have Walmart. You know, they pride themselves on always the lowest, everyday low prices. So they're being the cost leader. And there's no doubt the quality's not there. If you buy something at Walmart, it's going to be of lower quality. But it's always the lowest cost leader, hopefully. I mean, that is the lowest price. But you know what? It doesn't always. I have found things at Target cheaper than at Walmart. So anyway. But that's their leadership strategy in terms of costs. How can you do that with technology? The only way that you can really implement a management level strategic plan, technology-oriented, would be to do something with some part of the business to make you the lowest, to make you the cheapest. And you'd have to basically have a competitive advantage over everybody else in order to actually do that. And so you'd have to apply technology to make that happen somehow. Dell, you know, being able to be affordable. Hyundai, Kia. So those are supposed to be reliable, low cost. Grocery stores, high volume, low margin. Supermarket, big, super, low price. And it's supposed to be cheaper to buy stuff at a grocery store than it is at a liquor store or a small mart. Differentiation in terms of that is a definition of offering a product or service that is perceived as being unique in the marketplace. Hummer, there's no other Hummers out there. And Audi, Michelin, for safety tires. Are those tires, Michelin? I don't know. Lundy's, I don't know what those stores are. Those are high end. So I guess Lenardi's out here. And, I don't know what the other one, Albertsons? I don't know. I think Lucky's and Safeway are supposed to be the low end. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. I don't go to grocery stores very often. Because they have high volume, long lines. So you may not necessarily want to spend the cost. I mean, spend a little bit more and not have to wait in line. That's my point. Okay, in terms of the focus quality, focus on offering products or services that are unique, that are different to a particular segment or a buyer group. This is where you get the high niche markets. You get the custom-made, one-of-a-kind stainless steel pen or something, you know, fountain pen or something. You know, you get these products that people buy, and people buy them. High-end products. And now you're looking at within a segment of a particular product line to a specific geographic market. And so it's generally, when I think of focused products, I always think of more expensive products. When I think of generic products, I always think of low-end. The internet is generic. Anything you buy on the internet these days is, you're looking for low cost. You're looking for generic. It's a computer. It's a fake iPad. It's whatever you're looking for. Which is kind of like ruin the focus, actually, if you think about it from a technology perspective. You can't sell a high-end item on the internet anymore, unless you go, like, say, to eBay or something like that. I don't know. But so technology doesn't necessarily follow in well with this focus, because technology makes things broad in a lot of ways. It makes things more obtainable. So an example, and these are low-tech these are low-tech things. It would be a restaurant. You can't have a restaurant on the internet. So, physician offices, you can't see a doctor on the internet. In fact, if you get medical advice on the internet, don't trust it. It's way too broad. It might be your problem, or it might be 20,000 other people's problems, but not yours, because it's too generic, too broad. And legal offices as well. You can't get legal services on the internet either. The product does not transform itself well. So, all right. So, alternative business strategies. Well, this is a good stopping point. So I'm going to end this lecture on this slide and then continue next week with the second half of this, and probably finish this next week. For those of you who came in a little late, sign the roster if it's going around still. And I talked about the first assignment as something that you probably want to start looking at. It's finding a business, it's finding an article somewhere on the internet, in a business trade magazine, anywhere you want, on how a business can benefit, or some kind of a management level, business level, strategic advantage that information technology has provided. So something on the theme of the course in general. 250 words or so, or more. You're just basically writing a summary of the article, and you're giving me a reference for the article. So you're telling me where you found it. The ITU EMS is not ready yet, so you can't submit it, but it should be ready soon. So I'll announce when it actually becomes available for you to submit it.
Then we can just submit it to the dean.
Unfortunately, well, actually it would probably work out well for this class, but unfortunately you have to submit it directly to the EMS. In order for it to be tracked correctly, so you can get credit for it and you can count it towards your grade. Otherwise, when you send things in email, it gets lost. So, all right, thank you, and I will see you next week. Okay, enjoy the weekend.